Hey everybody, this is Guy Midkiff with Wise Guy Talks. Today I have Victor Avila in, and we're going to talk about some of his life experiences. But before I begin, this show is in memorial to Special Agent Jaime Zapata. Jaime paid the ultimate sacrifice. He made that for all Americans back in 2011. His partner, Victor Avila, will be our guest today on Wise Guy Talks in participation with your South Lake. Victor, how are you doing today?
I'm doing good. Thank you for having me, Guy. Thanks for the opportunity.
You about to call me Guy? You about to slip into a little Espanol there on me?
Well, maybe later.
So my wife, she speaks multi-languages, and I'm just curious, do you dream in Spanish? I mean, do you think things out in Spanish?
I think I used to because Spanish was my first language. I'm not sure. I think both now. I really thought about it in a while.
Do you speak Spanish at home to your children, or
Yes.
both go back and
Yes,
forth?
my daughter's completely fluent in both. My son struggles with speaking Spanish, but completely understands it 100% and writes it and reads it.
Yeah, what a gift. Let's talk about your parents. I always like to start at the beginning, at the building block, because that's kind of the foundation of who we all are. Tell me a little bit about your parents.
My parents are, I'm a first-generation Mexican-American. My parents were born in Mexico, in the state of Chihuahua. They immigrated here in the States in the early 60s. They came here for what a lot of people do, is come here for a better life and the dream and the American dream. And they really have done that, at least through us and their children, meaning I have an older sister and I have a twin sister. And so it's only three of us. And they were successful in bringing us up with good moral values, conservative values, and also teaching us the sense of what hard work is, what being a Hispanic is, speaking two languages was very important, and a lot of other things, but really allowing us to be successful. And we're the first ones in my family to go to school and graduate from the university. So hard work, God's faith in my family, and really a very wholesome upbringing. A lot of discipline involved there as well, but really letting us be ourselves and kind of blossom into what we've become today.
If you could pick a lesson or two that you learned from your parents, what would that be?
Oh my goodness, there's so many, but hard work is one. Hard work pays off. Respecting authority was big in my household. God and religion and faith continues to be that in my household as well. So those were the core issues that they really instilled in us.
So you may not know it, but I grew up very close to you. I grew up in Pecos, and you grew up in El Paso. We used to play off season the El Paso Rockets, so I could remember that from years ago. What was it like growing up in El Paso for you?
El Paso is very unique, border town. It really is a very unique location in the country. And El Paso being where it's at, you have New Mexico and Arizona there next to you, and of course Ciudad Juarez on the other side. But grew up going to both sides of the border. Crossing the border for me was like anything else. I never saw it as something as unique and extraordinary as it was. Not until I was older, I realized how many people would come into El Paso just to want to go over and experience Mexico and seeing that. Of course, there were different times back then when tourism was still viable and you could go over to Mexico and enjoy some drinks and good food. It's starting to come back a little bit, but nevertheless, I grew up on both sides of the border, knowing both cultures. It was very important for me and my family to understand both. And as a Hispanic, it's sometimes very difficult to know both cultures. That you were expected to know American culture, John Wayne, but also know Vicente Fernandez and Mexican culture and movies. And we had a great combination. My dad was like a big Elvis Presley fan, and that's why I'm a big Elvis Presley fan myself. I used to listen to Tom Jones and those music growing up. At the same time, listen to a lot of Mexican folk music as well.
Did you work when you were in high school?
Oh yeah,
What kind of work did you do?
I started working. Well, my dad was a contractor, so I always worked with him. He was a truck driver before he became a full-time contractor, so I would go with him in the truck and help him in his route. But then he became a construction contractor. He did a lot of remodeling, and so I learned a lot about construction. He would put me to do a lot of jobs. I would be the helper, and then eventually, in high school, I got a job at the local grocery store. Back then, it was Safeway, and didn't stop working ever since then until we could talk about when that stopped.
Sure. Did you have any heroes growing up?
I can't say that I did. I did admire. I did admire law enforcement, but I'm not gonna be the one to say, oh, since I was 5, I wanted to be a police officer. No, that wasn't the thing. I really, in the border town, there's a very, very large presence of all types of law enforcement in El Paso, and concentration of law enforcement, and so that was something that we grew up seeing, and so that was one thing that I always was attracted to, not necessarily being a police officer, but law enforcement in general.
So, I hear you make a mean carne asada and that you like to smoke meat,
Pretty good at
barbecues
it.
and stuff.
Pretty good.
How can I get better at making a carne asada?
Well, I'll have you over, and I'll have you try my brisket or my pulled pork.
Pulled pork, I love it. There's just so many different things that you can do with a good pork. So let's jump into it. First of all, I want to talk about Special Agent Jaime Zapata and the fact that you worked with him. And what did you guys actually do for the government? What was his role and what was your role, specifically your job descriptions?
Well, we both had the same mission. I was permanently assigned to the U.S. Embassy in Mexico City for the ICE office, and ICE, the office was. There's 2 divisions of ICE. There's enforcement removal operations, and there's Homeland Security investigations, and that's what I worked under as a special agent or a criminal investigator, just like FBI or DEA, Secret Service. And so our mission was cumbersome. It was complex, but it was clear, and it had to do with training the government of Mexico in how to conduct investigations, prosecute cases, training, you name it, and at the same time enforcement of a lot of what ICE does, and that is any kind of drug trafficking. So Homeland Security, their mission as a whole is to investigate anything that has a nexus to the U.S. border. If it touches the U.S. border, Homeland Security has a jurisdiction to investigate that. And so we're talking human trafficking, human smuggling, money laundering, bulk cash smuggling, commercial fraud. A lot of people forget that immigration and customs, as when the merger happened, was all U.S. Customs Service as well. And so all enforcing customs laws and IPR, intellectual property rights violations, and many, many, many others all combined into that small office. And we pursued all of those.
I think there's a big misconception in America that ICE, the only mission that they have in life is to repatriate illegals that are in this country back across the border. So what you've basically described is it's way more complex, and there's 2 specific branches of ICE from the way that I've heard you describe it in a lot more detail. So you only knew Jaime for a short time, is that correct?
Yeah, and it's important to note that because Jaime was in Mexico as a TDY agent. A TDY is a temporary duty agent. We used to have, I actually started myself, my career in Mexico in Ciudad Juarez at the U.S. Consulate as a TDY agent, eventually became on as a permanent agent, as a full-blown accredited diplomat. It's a very different status than a TDY agent. A TDY agent, even though he's there on official capacity and representing the U.S. government, doesn't have the full diplomatic status that an accredited diplomat does. It makes a difference, and we could talk about that because of what's happened recently with the case. But he had just arrived in the country just about a little over a week before I met him. And I hadn't met him because I wasn't in the country myself. I was out conducting other investigations, and I met him the assignment that afternoon on February 14, 2011.
So the assignment was made on the 14th. That's the first time you met Jaime. What was your first impression when he walked in? Or you walked
We had been receiving agents. He was out of the Laredo, Texas office, and we had been receiving agents continuously from that office to uh, pursue other investigations. Our office was so small and we're so understaffed and undermanned that we needed agents to come into the country and help us with their investigations. And Jaime was another agent that was in rotation at that time. And so I met him, a good guy. We exchanged numbers. Communications are very important when you get to the country. I had a box full of phones, disposable phones that you could use. And we exchanged numbers and told him, listen, we'll head out from my apartment. And this is after a lot of other things happened that we'll talk about right now. But, asked him to meet me at my apartment, heading north out of the city the following day at 6:30 in the morning.
So when you met him the first time, did you speak English, Spanish, combination of the two?
Oh, no, English, all English.
What was his demeanor? What was he like? I mean, physically describe him.
He's a big guy, athletic, good-looking guy. He very, and this was not just at the time that I met him, because when I met him that afternoon, spoke very, very briefly to him, basically giving him instructions to meet him the following day. But of course, the following day, I had a good opportunity to talk a lot, and he reminded me a lot of myself. He grew up along the border in Texas, down in South Texas, and he was very ambitious to enhance his career, just like the way I was. That's the reason why I took the assignment in Mexico, is to start doing something different in my career. And I could just see myself in him. I knew that he was a hardworking agent because when we were on that road, he received a call of a seizure from the port of entry down in Laredo. And you know that working agents do that, and I used to do that myself. I was known for, being proactive and investigating cases. So I knew that he was a hardworking agent and would do good if he would ever be assigned to Mexico.
So you've used that phrase in multiple interviews, a working agent. Just kind of quickly, that means probably something in your group more than the general public. So dive into that just a little bit and describe, when you're saying someone's a working agent, what are you actually saying?
Oh my goodness, it's it's a great question, Guy, because it does make a difference, and I pride myself in being one of those, that I was an agent that worked. Not everyone works at the capacity that they are able to, unfortunately, right? In the government, that's just the way it is. But there are agents that separate themselves from others in the amount of work that they can handle, the amount of work they can do. Not that they're super agents or anything like that. It's just, proactive and trying to make a difference.
So there's going to be a lot of people listening, and right now as we do this, there's people sitting around the table. My children are two that'll be the first to hear this. And I'd like for you to explain to me briefly, why is it important for you to tell the story that we're about to hear?
It's very important for many reasons. One is just to bring the awareness. A lot of people, it's been over 9 years, and I still encounter people that have never heard of Jaime's loss and the attack that we went through. And so that's one of the reasons I do the interviews, is to bring awareness, to keep Jaime's memory alive, to prove that his death is not in vain, and many other reasons, because of what we're living through today, and border security and immigration and everything else. Jaime was a part of that, and as a survivor of this attack, I think it's part of my duty. I struggled with, what do you do in your identity after the shooting? I was a law enforcement officer, and and I've learned, yes, I'm a husband, yes, I'm a father, I'm a son, but when you're a law enforcement officer, a lot of people identify you that first. Even my own family, it's just something that carries you. It's a unique profession, and so I struggled with that, and so that for me is very important to continue that.
So what I want to do is I want to kind of step through this process. Tell me about, we're going to roll the clock back to February the 14th of 2011. On that day, you were given an assignment to go on a mission. When you were given that assignment, tell me how that works. How are you actually given an assignment? Does it come down as a memo, a text, or does somebody call you up and say,
This one was this whole assignment was very unique in that it was all oral. There was no written operational plan. In other instances, and almost in every other instance, there was a written operational plan where you bring it in together and write down actually what you're gonna say, what
okay,
you're gonna do. In this case, it was just oral. It was just initially a heads up from my coworker saying, "Hey, listen, you're gonna be sent to Monterey," and he kind of gave me a heads up around noon, and I, kind of flipped my top. I had just walked in to the country at 1 a.m. Been out about 5-7 days on a prior investigation, and I couldn't understand why they would have chosen me to go. There's other agents in the office that could have gone, especially because the assignment was for another case that I was not involved in almost at all. And so I didn't understand why those agents assigned to the case, what we call the case agent or the co-case agent, would be doing this assignment. Nevertheless, after lunch in Mexico City, after 2-3 o'clock, it's lunchtime over there, my immediate supervisor then called me in and gave me the actual assignment, saying, "Listen, we need you to take the TD wire Jaime Zapata with you and go pick up this equipment from our ICE agents from the Monterey office." And I didn't take this lightly. I knew this was wrong. There was something going on. I said, "Isn't there other methods?" It's important to note here that my supervisors and the office had been negotiating this equipment to be brought into the country since December, months before. And there was numerous communications and emails, all of which I was never privy to. I knew what was going on that day only about picking up the equipment. I was never briefed on any of the other information whatsoever, which is also very unique in law enforcement. The briefing is as important as the actual assignment. And so I challenged it and contacted our assistant attaché, ICE assistant attaché out of Monterey. And I talked to him right there in my supervisor's office and said, "Hey, what's going on?" He's like, "Hey, listen, let me tell you, it's hot right now. The Highway 57, which we'll talk more in detail, we're having a lot of firefights between the Zetas cartel and the military and the police." And I said, "Why are we doing this? Why aren't we sending this equipment via a diplomatic pouch?" A diplomatic pouch being a secure truck in which all the U.S. Embassy personnel obtain their mail and whatever you order in the mail. That's how it comes through a diplomatic pouch. It's secured by diplomatic immunity. And so I shot that out. They said, "Oh, we already tried that. Why don't you fly it in?" Everything that I said that I'm listening for the first time that apparently had been discussed for months before. And I was just bringing it up thinking it was the first time that I was bringing it up. But my counterpart in Monterey agreed. He says, "Listen, we shouldn't be doing this. This is very dangerous right now." So I then asked my supervisor, my immediate supervisor, I asked him to go in there. At this time, the deputy attaché and the attaché are in a meeting behind a closed door. I asked them, go knock on the door and talk to Tony being the deputy attaché, and say, listen to what we're talking and what the assistant attaché in Monterey is saying, and let's bring that up to him. So he does. We're all 5 feet away. It's a very small office. So I'm standing there. My supervisor knocks on the door. Anthony Salisbury comes out, the deputy attaché, and we give him the concerns that I just shared with you. And he says he wasn't aware of any security issues in Mexico.
I want to make sure I understand how the flow and the chain of command works. I was in the Marine Corps, so I understand the Marine version of chain of command. What role does the ambassador play in the chain of command? In other words, when there's a tasking order, which you were given, to go out and do this mission, does it have to be signed off by the ambassador?
No, in this case, it would have had to because of the alert that was issued by the ambassador about 3 weeks before the assignment.
And that's exactly what's next up. I was going to ask you, were you aware of Security Notice 2011-3 dated January the 18th, 2011, which was to all embassy employees from RSO Timothy Haley. Were you considered an embassy employee?
Of course, yes.
Okay, thank you. And the subject was warning about traveling on Highway 57, posted by the ambassador. So, did you make your superiors aware of the fact that this security notice was out there?
Of course, we were all aware. That email went through to all U.S. personnel. It was completely ignored. Completely ignored.
Do they have the authority to completely ignore an ambassador's
It's a
warning
unique
like that?
situation. So in the U.S. Embassy, there's approximately 75 agencies within the U.S. Embassy. The chief of mission is the U.S. ambassador. And so he's not the immediate supervisor for DEA. He's not the supervisor for FBI. He's not the head of ICE. There's 75 agencies there approximately. So we have to follow under the umbrella of the U.S. Embassy and the State Department rules because we're housed in there. But yet I have my own independent supervisors within my own chain of command, if that makes any sense. And hopefully that's clear. So if the ambassador puts something out for everybody, it applies to everyone, no matter what agency you work with, even if you're a State Department employee or you work for DEA or FBI or ICE or U.S. Marshals, anybody else in there. And so this specific alert was a second alert that had been issued already from 6 months prior. They knew. We all knew. That's what we did. We're also intelligence officers and gather intelligence in the government and the country that we're in because we're trying to help and we're trying to get the bad guys to make it as clear as possible here. But we all knew that there were security issues in this country. Mexico was labeled a critical 4 level, which is just as the same level as Afghanistan or Iraq and those countries. And so that alert was completely ignored. The regional security office, which issued the alert because of the ambassador, was not aware. They asked you have to ask for the permission from the regional security office if you're going to be traveling on that road, whether for personal reasons or business reasons. My office never did that.
So if your business is the intel business and kind of knowing the lay of the land and what's going on, and the RSO has made this proclamation, the security notice, how are we to view the fact that your immediate superiors were not aware of this information?
It's not that they were not aware. It's there's a lot of other terrible words that come to my mind. One of them that's not too bad that I can say is incompetence. They just did not not just the alert, but the procedures that we went by on any other assignment. We had backup, we had escorts, we had notifying the government of Mexico. A lot of things went into place. Those things were not allotted to us, and they were not afforded to us.
All right, for the civilians, that'll be the vast majority of people that are listening to this are not military, not law enforcement. Why didn't you just say, pound sand, I'm not going to do it? What would have happened to you if you would have done that?
I would have been curtailed from the country and been suspended and possibly lose my job. And in the military and as in the federal government, you have orders, and once you're ordered, you're ordered. And so that's what happened. Tony Salisbury says that he's not aware of any security issues in Mexico. He wants the equipment by close of business day tomorrow, and that's it. He goes back into the office, closes the door, and my supervisor and I look at each other, and here we go. Now let's make arrangements to do this.
What was to keep you from saying, well, here's a copy of it, sir. Here it is right here.
Yeah, I wish it would have. I wish it would have been escalated to at that point, but it wasn't, and I didn't do that. And
all right, so let's finish up the 14th. I would assume, I don't want to put words in your mouth, but you're starting to get a feeling of pit in your stomach, I would guess. You're starting to get a little bit anxious about this assignment above and beyond what you normally do.
Absolutely, absolutely. I mean, I know that I've driven on Highway 57 many times. I'm very familiar with the road. It's just one of those things that you just once you're ordered, and I met Jaime and I said let's prepare it as much as I could. I got on the phone with the assistant attaché and said, listen, where are we going to meet? So San Luis Potosí, the state of San Luis Potosí, is more or less halfway point. They didn't want to drive all the way to San Luis Potosí because that's even the hottest area where the Zeta cartel controls. And so we ended up driving a little bit further past San Luis Potosí to meet them up. And that's what we did.
Okay. So when you went home that evening, is it acceptable to talk to your spouse, Claudia, about this stuff?
Sure.
Did you say something to her? Did you say, what are these crazy guys trying to, I mean,
Well,
what did you say?
it's very good. It's a very good question because I'm a human being. I'm a husband, and it happened to be Valentine's Day, and it ruined our Valentine's dinner plans. She had made these really nice plans at our favorite sushi restaurant, so that didn't work out. But it's funny how God has a plan, and when I got home, my kids and my wife had brought the food delivered to the house, to the apartment, and my kids dressed up as the servers, and so it was a very, very memorable dinner. It actually turned out great, and so we had a great night. And my wife was very upset that, what do you mean you're leaving again? So I had this issue at my home that I was traveling. I was known in the office as Trips, because it's not because I wanted to travel, as the investigations took me all over Mexico, Central America, and the United States. And my wife's like, you need to stop and try to do as much as you can to be home. Sometimes I was at home, 3-4 days out of the month.
Just quickly, so how did you sleep that night? I mean, were you
I was
anxious?
good. I was good. It was a great night, and ready to leave at 6:30. When I woke up that morning, my kids were still asleep, and Victor was asleep. I kissed him, and then I went to kiss Sofia, and she woke up, and she knew right away. She's like, "You're going out of town again," because I wasn't wearing a suit. I always wear a suit to the office when I go to the embassy, but I wasn't wearing a suit, and so she knew that when I did not wear a suit, I was traveling. And I told her, no, I didn't want her to think that I was leaving out of town, because obviously I thought I was going to be back that day. And I said, no, I'll be back today, but you're not wearing a suit. And I said, no, it's okay, I'll be back. And I kissed her, and then Jaime was there right at 6:30, and we jumped in my armored Suburban, and there we went.
Did the government keep you in a secure location, a compound in Mexico? Your family?
No, it's a nice apartment complex. A lot of the U.S. Embassy employees are housed within a certain area, but it's not a secure compound. It's just an apartment. You live amongst other people there.
So you get in your car, you go to the embassy, or Jaime picks you up?
No,
or-
he was dropped off by another coworker at my apartment, and then from there we head north. Our apartment is north of the city. As you can imagine, the traffic in Mexico City is horrific. So there's no way for me to drive down to the embassy and then try to come get out.
So the vehicle, did you have to go get the vehicle, or was
No,
it
it's parked
delivered
at
to
my
you?
apartment. It's
So-
it's an issue. It's a issued. It was a 2009 Suburban that's issued to me personally. In Mexico, there's the exception. As a federal agent, when I was on stateside, I can't have my family in my G-Ride and my police car, my unmarked car. But in Mexico, they want you to have your family in the armored vehicle. So we use that as my official vehicle and personal vehicle as well.
Tell the listeners about that vehicle.
It's an impressive vehicle. It's a Suburban. It weighs almost 6 tons. We got them brand new in September of 2009, and I was the only one to drive that vehicle. It had issues. It had issues because in Mexico City, those vehicles hardly fit even on the road. Some didn't fit in garages. It was hard to maintain because the government had not set up a good place or had identified a good mechanic location. We were using our own regular mechanic to fix armored vehicle parts that are not customary to them. Even though there's a lot of armored vehicles in Mexico, they're just like Honda Accords. Everyone's armored, but good vehicles. It was a good vehicle. We did go through brakes, once a month. We had a lot of issues with technical problems with it, and we could go over that.
So how much training did you and Jaime get to be able to train this vehicle in a defensive posture in the event that you had to evade and escape?
Absolutely none. Zero. I had never driven an armored vehicle in my life until I got to Mexico, and I learned by trial by fire. The first one I got issued was a Dodge Durango, to an older Dodge Durango, and immediately on the first time I drove it, had the called the periférico. There was kind of like the interstate highway. It was bumper to bumper traffic, and I hit the car in front of me because I couldn't stop soon enough. These cars take a longer time to brake and a longer time to accelerate because of the weight. And so immediately I hit the car in front of me, hit the bumper off, and I learned quickly that that's how I learned in Mexico. But there was absolutely no training. Now they have obviously instilled necessary and treatment. Training for driving armored vehicles.
Were you familiar with the systems in the vehicle, like the GPS locator, how to use that, how it worked?
So these Suburbans are equipped with a PA system, lights and siren, and the GPS tracker actually wasn't. It was what do you call it? After factory type of it wasn't installed until maybe a year later after we got the Suburbans. As a matter of fact, I think I was the last one that got it installed in my Suburban because I was out of town all the time. But there was a GPS tracker that was installed in the Suburban. It's a toggle switch. If you switched it up or down, it automatically sent a signal to Washington, D.C. We tested it there in Mexico City. We have the people on the phone. You could hear the siren go off. And it had a red light, a yellow light, and a green light. Green light meaning it's working. Yellow meaning it's trying to transmit the signal, and red is there's no signal. Within months, it was at red. It never really worked.
So what you're describing is that for several iterations, for several trips with this vehicle, you drove it without one of the most vitally important instruments on that vehicle, and that would be the GPS locator.
Yes, and also the siren had given out. We use the siren a lot, as you can imagine, in Mexico City when we had detailed or our administrators come into the country, our Homeland Security Secretary, whoever it is that's coming in. We jump in and we're security details, so we use the siren a lot. The siren had burned out, so the PA system didn't work, and the GPS tracker wasn't working as well.
So Jaime shows up at your apartment, is that correct?
Yes,
and you exchange pleasantries.
Oh yeah, it was never awkward with him.
Did you connect right off the bat?
Right off the bat, he obviously he was in the front passenger seat, and I'm driving out, and we talked about anything and everything you can imagine. Like if I've known him for a long time, he shared a lot of personal information with me about his fiancée. He was 32 years old. He's just starting his life and possibly getting married, and all the issues that he was going through. A big fisherman, big hunting guy, came from a law enforcement family. His father is a retired law enforcement officer. His brothers are in law enforcement, and so the border. Never had an awkward moment with him. It was a great conversation.
So to circle back, there was never a threat assessment or intel briefing given to you on the 14th?
No.
Not even a consideration?
None.
Were you aware of any, and this kind of goes back to the intel aspect of it. I mean, you guys pick up chatter, the bad guys, they're using different networks that I would assume you have access to. You weren't hearing anything, above normal chatter at that point?
At that point, no. At that point, none of that. The only thing that my wife worked at the regional security office, so when she went into work that Tuesday morning, just in pleasant conversation, a friend of mine, diplomatic security special agent, he asked her, "Hey, how's Victor?" And she tells him he's on his way to Monterey, and he's like, "What did you just say?" He's on his way to Monterey. And like, no one's supposed to be on that road. What do you mean, on the road driving? It was just that surprising to everyone that we were on that mission.
You had described to me, because I always do a pre-interview with everybody, and I find that I can pull out information that I can use in the subsequent interview. And in that interview that we did previously, you talked about in 2008 taking a family out country, and in that process you almost described a scene from Sicario where there was three. Did I get
Yeah.
that right? There
Yes.
are three up armored vehicles that were following the family vehicle out of town.
Yes.
And yet, this mission arguably was more critical because of the equipment that you were bringing back. And how many assisting vehicles went with you that day?
None.
Why do you think that is?
My supervisors were not concerned for that. They were very, very concerned with that equipment. They wanted it. You know, I don't know to this day, 9 years later, I don't know the why the sense of urgency to want that equipment. I know that they wanted it for for an investigation. It was a big money laundering case. It was one of the biggest that ICE, even our legacy agency, U.S. Customs, had ever seen. And I think they got clouded by what that case would bring to the office.
Talking about your equipment, just kind of dig a little deeper into that. Did you have any special comm gear, secure comm gear, or?
Just our cell phones. I happen to have two, radio phone, Nextel radio, and a BlackBerry. And a personal, actually. I had 3 phones on me.
BlackBerry.
Yeah, BlackBerry back then.
And when you guys checked your weapons out for this particular mission, did you take a long gun? Do you take anything in particular? What kind
No,
of weapon
long guns were not issued to us. I did have a couple of handguns with me. Those are issued to me. And I had them in my backpack. I told Jaime about them on the drive. I told him, and I used the words, if the blank hits the fan, my guns are right here. He says, okay, you know.
Where were they, actually?
It was a Glock 19 and a...
No, where were they?
Oh, they were in my backpack on the floorboard of the back of the Suburban, right behind my seat, right to the next, in between, kind of behind the center console, if you will.
Did you guys not keep them on your person for a particular reason, or is it just
Yes, different reasons, and that one just happened to be in my backpack with 2. Never expected to be, leaving the vehicle for a long time.
And what did you? Were you guys issued ballistic vests?
We took our ballistics vest that we were issued on stateside. Mine had already been expired.
Say that again.
Mine was already expired.
What does that mean?
Ballistics vests actually have a shelf life and are fully functional for a certain amount of time. They lose its effectiveness after a certain date, and the date's stamped on the vest, on the sleeve of the vest.
Who was in charge of making sure your equipment was up to date?
My agency.
Did they ever address that?
No, it's one of those things that they just it's not on their priority to get your vest, and we barely had money sometimes to get brakes on our Suburban. We had to beg them for money to send us money to repair our brakes.
Okay, Victor, what we're going to do is, you've told this story literally thousands of times. Tell it in a concise way. I'm asking that you expand on the part where the BGs, the bad guys, get out and they talk to you in Spanish. And they do use profanity. I'll give everybody a heads up. If you speak Spanish, I'm asking Victor actually try to remember in as much detail as what they said to you when the event happened. So let's start at the point where you said, hey, Jaime, get over to the left seat, you're driving.
Right. We had already picked up the equipment. We did the exchange. We're heading back. Jaime had seen a Subway restaurant and a Church's Chicken, and he had kind of been taken aback that these restaurants were in Mexico. And I tell him, we have all the restaurants, everything you have in the U.S. is here. It's just a little different. But he wanted to eat at Subway. I said, we'll stop at Subway. I was very familiar with that stop. It's a big rest area. You gas up there, and it's very clean and very familiar. I said, oh, we'll stop there. So, I'm still driving back south until we get to the Subway. We eat outside. It was beautiful weather. I always make the reference because that was one of the perks of being in Mexico is the weather. It was February 15th. It was 72 degrees. It was beautiful weather, and it's very calm that day, very clear. And I told him, I tell him this is San Diego weather. And so we're heading back, and I throw him the keys. I go, hey, here you go. It's your turn to drive. Part of the reason Jaime went with me was also to help me drive, and he had never driven an armored vehicle, and I knew that, and I told him this is actually the best time to do it on an open road rather than in Mexico City. As you can imagine, the traffic there is just horrific. So take your time, get used to the weight and the acceleration and braking and all that, and I had a lot of work to do. I was doing so many things on my BlackBerry. I was conducting putting together a human trafficking conference. Had so many things, tasks that I would have, I said I'll take the opportunity to do it while Jaime is driving. So he starts driving, and within I'm on my phone. I call my supervisor, give him our location, and tell him we'll be coming into the city about between 7 and 9 p.m., which is rush hour in Mexico City. I told Jaime, as a matter of fact, when you come in to the city, you'll pull over and I'll take it in because it'll be very difficult for you to drive in there. And he's driving. I'm on my BlackBerry. I'm trying to get work done on there, and he's the one that alerts me when two SUVs pass us. By the way, Highway 57 is a 4-lane highway, 2 lanes going south, 2 lanes going north, separated by a median. We're on the far right lane going south, and two SUVs passes at a much higher rate of speed. I told Jaime to keep it between 70, 72 miles an hour, and these two SUVs passes at a much higher rate of speed. And the second one looks like there's a silhouette of a long gun sticking in between the middle seats. He tells me, "Hey, check it out." And I look up, and passes us, and I see it. And sure enough, you could see, it's occupied by several occupants, and I could see the silhouette of the gun, and they're gone. I tell Jaime, just let them go. You just continue driving, let them go. And they were almost gone to where we couldn't see them. But within seconds, they slowed down dramatically. I don't know, 20, 30, 35 miles an hour. And we were right up on them. And so one stayed in front of us in the right lane, one stayed on the left lane. And they started to conduct a rolling roadblock. Initially, it was a little confusion, like what's going on here. And Jaime pulls the Suburban to the right. And one of the SUVs is the one on the left trying to come in. And I tell Jaime, punch it. Just punch it. And he does. But, the SUVs, it doesn't go as fast and accelerate as quick as theirs, even though initially it does. And we try to get away, and here they come. And now they come in even tighter. And the one on Jaime's side, on the driver's side, in the left lane, they lower their windows with, long arms, AK-47s out, yelling at the top of the lungs to tell Jaime to pull over, pull over, pull over. And I tell Jaime, don't pull over, don't pull over. And, they're almost crashing the vehicle, our vehicle. At the same time, simultaneously, the one in the front is braking very hard. And so they execute a rolling roadblock, which we were trained to do as ourselves. So we end up on the right shoulder of Highway 57, and it happens to be an area with if you drive on the highway, there's not a lot of places that happens to have a big shoulder area, and that's where we end up stopping. Well, as soon as we stop, Jaime puts the Suburban in park, and it unlocks the doors, and that's the way these Suburbans were programmed. And they come out, we have about 7 or 8 shooters. We call them shooters or Zetas cartel members. I don't know who they were at that time. And they kind of surround the Suburban in front of us on a U-shaped form. One of them immediately comes to Jaime's door and opens the door. Swings the door wide open. Jaime grabs the handle of the Suburban, which it has an industrial handle. It doesn't have your usual door handle because the doors are so heavy. He grabs it and slams it right back shut, and we start hitting the lock buttons. And the guy out there and everyone is yelling at us. The guy at Jaime's door is yelling, "Bájate, cabrón, abre la puerta, baja la ventana, open the door, F this, F that, open the door, get out. And we have our hands up to the windshield, and I'm yelling at them, "We're not who you think we are. We're Americans. We're U.S. Embassy employees. We're U.S. diplomats. We work at the U.S. Embassy in Mexico City. This is a diplomatic vehicle. I'm yelling all that constantly over and over and over in Spanish. I'm yelling it at the top of my lungs. And I tell them, let me identify myself. My diplomatic passport was in my backpack. I said, let me show you my passport, who I am, that we're U.S. diplomats. But they had evil in their eyes. I didn't know at that time whether it had hurt me or not. But then later on I found out that they had. And I tried to talk to what seemed to be like their leader, which it was, the guy that was at Jaime's door. And I said, let me talk to you. They wouldn't listen. They just had evil in their eyes. At that time, in the middle of that commotion, two of the shooters, or two of the Zetas cartel, come to my window. And they introduce an AK-47 and a handgun right by my head. When Jaime and I hit the lock buttons, we inadvertently lowered the armored vehicle window about 2 inches. And that was enough for them to introduce the barrels of those both guns. As soon as they did, I raised the window up, and it grabbed both barrels of both guns. And I myself, braced myself up against the post of the Suburban to the right, try to make myself smaller. I had him here. And I see one of the shooters, wiggle the AK-47, the rifle, the butt of the gun wiggling up and down, trying to either get it out or get it in. I'm not sure what he's doing. But then without any other notice, they open fire into the cabin. So they immediately open fire, and I turn this way. I see Jaime get hit on his torso. He yells out, I'm hit, I'm shot. And I tell him, go, 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 go. In the middle, these guys are shooting. I don't know how many rounds they shot inside the cabin. At one point, I grabbed the handgun myself because it was shooting right by my left ear. And I grabbed it and I wiggled it with the guy, and eventually they pulled both guns out, and the window goes up, and they just sprayed that side of the Suburban. I looked at Jaime, and Jaime I tell him, go, 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 but he was already becoming unresponsive. And so I get the gear shift, and I slam it down, and I put my hand on his foot, on his knee, to accelerate, to press the accelerator, and he does, and we crash the Suburban in front of us, or the SUV that was blocking us. When it does that, it crashes it. I'm jumping all over inside the cabin. The Suburban then crosses Highway 57 into that big median. I try to get the steering wheel to get it back on Highway 57. I tried to get the Suburban back on the road, but at that point I couldn't get it to move anymore. It was shot up. The tires were shot up. They kept on spraying. I say spraying, I'm shooting bullets and AK-47s and handguns and everything they had on them, that whole right side. And I later learned all the ballistic reports. I have them. I mean, it was shot up. There was a lot of rounds that came in through the back. The equipment was all in the back of the Suburban, all the way to my seat. There was no opportunity for me to jump in the back or anything like that. And so immediately, Jaime is becoming unresponsive. I'm trying to figure out where they're going. I see one of the Suburbans go south, and then I see the second one go, and then the second one makes a U-turn, comes back, parks right in front of our Suburban. Two guys get out with AK-47s, and they look at me, and I look at them, and they just shoot and spray the front windshield. And I'm just, I just kind of freeze there and realize I'm getting protected by the glass. I didn't realize I had been shot 3 times already. And so I see them get back in the SUV and drive off. And so now I look at Jaime. I'm attending to him and his leg. He's bleeding profusely from his leg. And I'm trying to keep him awake and keep him alive. In between all that, I grab my radio, Nextel radio phone. It doesn't work. It's out of service. So I slam that on the floorboard. I grab my BlackBerry, and I call the U.S. Embassy.
U.S. Embassy, switch to office. Victor Avila from ICE. We got a shot. We are on the highway of Querétaro, Mexico. We've been shot and attacked on the highway. I am an ICE special agent.
What is your name, you said, sir?
Victor Avila, please call Jerry Miles. I don't have another phone.
But what did you look at?
Please call Jerry Miles. We've been shot on the highway.
Highway? What is the highway, sir? To where?
Mexico, Querétaro. They know where I'm at.
Okay. Try to remain online, please.
I called the actual main line that anyone, a customer or anyone would call. And so there's a 911 call. That's what they call it, a 911 call. It's actually just me calling the U.S. Embassy and the switchboard. And so the switchboard operator answers my call, and you can listen to it. It's online. I'm sure you'll post it on there, but it's my distress call saying, "This is Victor Avila from ICE. We have been shot. We are shot. We are on the highway. Please call Jerry Miles. Let him know. He knows where I'm at." They actually did not know where I was at. I didn't know where we were at. We were on Highway 57. I knew we had passed the city and state of San Luis Potosí, but I didn't know exactly where we were at, like an actual location. And so all of a sudden, it becomes very chaotic. He transfers the call, the switchboard transfers the call to the regional security office. The regional security office happens to have a temporary receptionist answering the phone. She answers the phone. I'm yelling at her who I am. She doesn't know what to do. She basically drops the phone, runs down the hallway, yelling, "Agent Avila has been shot. Agent Avila has been shot." My wife works there. She comes out of the office, and she's like, "What did you just say?" "Yeah, there's Agent Avila on the phone. He's been shot." So my wife goes into distress, and then the diplomatic security special agent, one of my friends, gets on the phone, and another one gets on the phone. And I'm talking to them, and they're like, "Where are you?" On the highway. I have no idea exactly where. And so now I have them on the phone. Eventually, the word gets quick to our ICE office, which happens to be across the hall on the other side. An ICE special agent, a friend of mine who we went to the academy together, gets on the line, and they're trying to figure out where I'm at. I'm trying to tell them where I'm at. They could hear me on the phone yelling at Jaime and trying to keep him awake and alive. And my friend, he used to be a paramedic before he was an agent. He's like, have you checked yourself? Have you checked yourself? And I said, no. And that's the first time I actually realized. He says, I need you to physically take your hand. I had a lot of shrapnel, a lot of glass around me, a lot of blood from Jaime and mine. And I didn't know exactly what my injuries were. Then I realized I had been shot in my chest. So I had a lot of blood on my right side just coming down my jeans. And then I look at my leg, and I realized that obviously I'd been shot in my leg. I didn't know I had been shot on the lower part of my leg until I got to the hospital. And so he's the first one to tell me, you got to take your belt off and cinch it as high as you can. Kind of do a tourniquet in the back, on the top of your leg. I did. Somewhere there, I got on the same BlackBerry. I called the head of our vetted unit in Mexico City of the federal police, Mexican federal police. We had a unit that was vetted that we worked with on all the investigations that we did. I called him, not at the usual number that I usually call him. I would call him usually either by radio or cell phone. I happened to dial his office number. He didn't recognize me, my voice, because I was in distress, yelling and screaming. And he's like, "Who's this?" And I go, "This is Victor. You gotta come help me. You gotta send a helicopter." So he eventually dispatches a helicopter from Mexico City. And now during this whole time, we're in the highway. I'm now I have my guns on me. Now I have one in my waistband. Now I have the other one. I'm just kind of looking at the traffic passing by. There's traffic. There's people on the highway slowing down, looking at us like, what's going on? At one point, there's a federal police unit, a marked unit that slows down and doesn't stop. And at one point, what looked to be a paramedic, kind of like an ambulance. We all recognize an ambulance, but it had different markings on it, not like a traditional ambulance. And it parks on the right side of the shoulder. This guy gets out and crosses Highway 57, comes over, and he's like, "Open the door." I'm like, "I'm not opening the door. I don't know who the hell you are." And I have him flanked with my gun, and he's like, "Open the door, open the door." And I did not open the door. I didn't trust anyone at that point. And I later learned in the trial in 2017, he is the Zetas ambulance. He works for the Zeta cartel. That's how organized they are. And so that happened. In between that, also a state police officer came from the other end, from the north side of the highway, around the Suburban, trying to get me to open the door. And as you can imagine, the corruption in Mexico, at that point, I didn't trust anyone. So the only person I trusted was the commander from the federal police. And I said, you have to send someone that I can trust. He says, I'm going to send you this person, this name, and they're on their way, Victor. They're on their way. Well, 40 minutes, it's a long, long time to be on that highway. Jaime was unresponsive. I closed his eyes. I was just trying to keep him awake and breathing. And I was on the phone at one point with the helicopter pilot. I was able to give him the GPS coordinates from my GPS. By the way, the GPS toggle switch to locate me, I did switch it, but it didn't send the signal to Washington, D.C. about 8 hours later. And so that didn't work. The PA system didn't work, so I couldn't talk to these guys through the PA. The Suburban was destroyed. And so about 40 minutes later, the cavalry showed up. The Mexican federal police and the Mexican military, they came out. That was so stressful because, they came guns a-blazing, and I'm thinking, I'm going to get shot here. They'll just finish me off. I don't know who the corrupt ones are and the good ones are at this point. They're going to just finish me off and kill me, and they say, they'll just say that I died during the original shootout. So that person, that designee that my friend sent over, I actually remember asking him for his credentials through the window, and he takes out his wallet and shows them, and it's me. He says, I'm here in direct orders from Mexico City. Okay. So they get me and Jaime out. I grab my backpack. I throw everything in there, including Jaime's phones. And I told him that backpack is not going to leave my sight. They said, okay. And they brought us back, both of us, to the helicopter. They put us in the helicopter, and it was about an 8-minute helicopter ride to the heliport, to the hospital in San Luis Potosí.
I heard you kind of talk about some things I'd never heard before. I didn't realize. I don't think I'd ever heard you talk before about an ambulance that actually came by, the Zeta ambulance. That kind of tells you systemically how embedded they are in the local culture and the local fabric, that they've got their own.
It really tells you the level of sophistication and organization that they have. The Zeta cartel they're not gangs. I'll put it to you that way. When people refer to, we have these drug gangs. They're not drug gangs. They're foreign terrorist organizations. That's what they are. And we could have a whole other interview about that and how I feel about that. But they're highly sophisticated, and a lot of their details came out in that trial in 2017. They checked out the 2 vehicles that they used for the ambush. They checked out their weapons and ammunition. They have fleet cards for gas. This is like a U.S. corporation, right? It's a company. And the only difference is that their mission is to extort, kidnap, murder, and deal in illicit activity.
Was the ambulance a cleanup crew?
It's their own, in case one of their own Zetas.
No, I'm talking about for you
Oh
guys.
yeah.
You think it was a cleanup crew?
No,
for you guys?
and we could talk about the aftermath of when I arrived at the hospital. A lot of people asked me how was I afraid during the shootout. I didn't have time to be afraid, but I was deadly afraid when I got to the hospital. I was so scared.
So one of the other things that I know in the military we get position reports constantly to a base, so everybody always knows where we are. It didn't sound like you were really required to, or it wasn't policy, or they generally knew where you were. But these guys, are there mile markers on Highway 57?
Yeah, that's how I kind of gave them the location. I gave them the closest kilometer marker.
Yeah, sure.
And but the only notification that I gave was to my boss, and that's just because of my own training. There wasn't a policy like you have to check in every 15 minutes or anything like that. I just called my supervisor and tell me we're on our way, and that was after we left the subway.
And I was a little confused. You said that they struck the vehicle from the rear. Did those rounds penetrate the vehicle?
Some did. So rear right and all the right side. And I didn't know until after I saw the ballistics reports. There was rounds inside the boxes, inside the equipment. That some rounds hit the back of our seats.
So do you think that that to some extent, I mean, it clearly saved your life, but
Yeah.
there's clearly weaknesses.
Yeah, armored vehicles are people call them bulletproof. They're bullet resistant. They're not. Nothing's 100% bulletproof. Maybe the president's car, but they're resistant enough to. It did save my life. It did. The ballistic in the windshield saved my life.
I just find it astonishing that no one stopped to help, and maybe it's just a culture. And I wouldn't say it's a culture. Maybe everybody's just afraid that they don't want to step into something that's going to get them killed.
Absolutely. I don't blame them. As the Mexican nationals and the citizens there, they see this violence on a daily basis. They're not gonna pull over and see what's going on. They're afraid for their own lives.
So you had the state of mind. I think a lot of people, maybe myself included, would have said, we're shot up. I'll take any ambulance that walks by that's got a red cross on the side of it or a white cross. I'm getting in. I'm going with them. But you didn't do that. Why didn't you do that, Victor?
When I saw the ambulance, it was in the shape of an ambulance. It was an ambulance, but it didn't have your traditional markings like a red cross from Mexico or green cross or anything like that. It was a vehicle that you could tell it was an ambulance, but the EMT that came out coming at me, to the Suburban, he didn't look like he was there to help. And I didn't know that he was a Zeta cartel, and I want to make that clear. I didn't know that he was part of that. I just didn't feel right to open the door. I didn't trust anyone. I didn't trust him. I didn't trust anyone coming to the car.
So that goes back to situational awareness. And one of the characters in that group of 7 or 8 that was shooting at you guys, his nickname was what?
Piolín, which is Tweety Bird.
Why do they call him Tweety Bird?
I guess because of his short stature.
What struck you about their size?
They're all pretty small in stature, very short guys, thin, clean cut. None of them were wearing military garb or in black or camouflage. No, they're wearing jeans and T-shirts.
Cowboy hats, boots.
No, very, believe it or not, very clean cut, mustaches, thin, short. But what I'll never forget is the evil in their eyes, the look that they had. It was just, that's the only word I can describe, as they were pure evil.
Did they have tattoos, any identifying marks?
No, at that time I couldn't see any of that, and a lot of them I don't think they did a lot that you could see. Like, these guys are not tattooed up to the neck and none of that.
Were there any identifying marks on them? I mean, anything at all that I mean, was one of them like a big talker? Did one of them do most of the talking?
Yeah, the Piolín guy is like it was leader of their, what they call estaca or hit squad. He's the one that did most of the talking. I mean, they were all yelling and shouting at us, but he's the one that did more of the talking. I remember him just because of this mustache. His mustache was a very clean-cut mustache.
So at this point, what I found out when I was doing my research is this whole issue becomes exponentially complicated. And I will say that I feel like it becomes exponentially complicated for the following reasons. Were you carjacked?
Oh, absolutely not.
And what makes you think that you were not carjacked? What happened to make you think you were not carjacked?
Several things. One, this is not the first time that U.S. agents in Mexico have been held up by cartel members at gunpoint. DEA agents, other FBI agents have been held at gunpoint by cartels around the country. And once they are identified, they identify themselves. The cartel kind of backs off and kind of says that, oh, there's an moment, and they realize that they're U.S. law enforcement, and they let them go. We'll get into this because that kind of became an unwritten rule since the death of DEA agent Enrique Kiki Camarena in 1985. Agent Camarena was captured and tortured, and that kind of became an unwritten rule within the criminal organizations in Mexico. Like, you just don't want to mess with the federal government and the U.S. federal government. They don't need that extra heat. They don't want to bring that attention to them. They have enough attention. And so that was kind of what almost all U.S. agents always kind of, they're not gonna cross that line. But then the criminal organizations in Mexico have transcended. They call them transnational criminal organizations. I call them foreign terrorist organizations. Are not the same that they were back in 1985. They are violent. They are terrorists. They will decapitate you. They will hang you from a bridge. They will extort you. They will kidnap you. They will torture you. They'll do all that to enhance their mission, and most of it is power and money. And so, and gain territory for their drug routes and everything else, human smuggling and trafficking. But anyway, that has really changed in the last, I would say, the last 10 to 15 years, how we deal with that.
So at some point they stopped fearing us.
Yeah, they decided that day that. By the way, they knew we were Americans. They testified to it at trial. They testified that they heard me loud and clear, that they knew that we were Americans, that we were U.S. Embassy employees, that we were diplomats, and they still decided to shoot.
So this paradigm shift, do you think it was a result of what some call weak political leadership in America? Do you think that they no longer feared America because of the leadership that was going on at the time? Can you make that stretch?
No, I think mostly what's going on in Mexico, and the control that these organizations have taken over in Mexico right now. The statistic is that they have these foreign terrorist organizations, these cartels, have influence or control over 80% of the country of Mexico. Think about that, 80%. And so almost anywhere you go now in urban areas, there's going to be that control by them. And so I don't think that it was that. It was more either they wanted to send a message, they were too committed. I don't know the answer to that.
But this is off topic, but my family, we like to go to Mexico. We like to go to Ixtapa, Cancun, Cozumel, all those. But if the cartels are controlling 80% of the country,
right?
Aren't we at something of a risk? Going
Absolutely. And I'll, just like I say that, I also say you could go to Puerto Vallarta and be fine. But the risk has increased dramatically in the last years. Cancun right now is very, very heavily occupied by these organizations, and so the risk is definitely there, and there's a higher risk now. You could go to Guadalajara and have a great time for 3 days and go to Tequila and it'd be great, but it's just the risk. Are you willing to take that risk? It does exist, and we always know that Mexico always tries to really protect their tourists, especially the beaches and stuff, and those for the most part are still okay, but not all of them.
So let's go back to the motive. Do you think that they had intel on the fact that you guys were going to be going down there? Do you think that this was essentially an ambush?
It was definitely an ambush. They knew we were on that highway. They knew. I don't know how they knew. They, there's so many. Think about trying to pull somebody over on Highway 114 or on I-35, or think about how you would know that this person is on that highway. We're traveling, just like everybody. We're not the only ones. This is not a desolate road by any means. This is the toll road, the quote unquote safe road in Mexico to travel from Mexico City up north to Texas.
Okay, so the fact that you guys were going out on this mission on the 15th, there couldn't have been that many people that knew about it. So at some point, the theory would be here that intel was intercepted at some level. Do you think it could have been a local national that worked in the embassy that may have had attention to it? Or
that's a possibility. We dealt a lot with that in Mexico with the government of Mexico. That's something that we dealt with on a daily basis, is what information you share, how you share it, who you share it with, how is it going to get out, is it going to get leaked. There's some operations that we organized an operation up until the moment of takedown, and it didn't happen because at that moment the information was leaked and there was no one there or whatever we were doing. So it's a common thing in Mexico that you had to deal with.
But what could be their motive? What could be their incentive picking up a $160,000 up armored vehicle? I mean, what could they have possibly gained by assassinating you two guys? Because surely they would have known that it was just going to bring down enormous heat on them.
And it did. It did bring that.
What do you think they were?
They definitely didn't want that vehicle. If you think about it, the way things went down, they would have, we were stranded on that highway. They had control. They could have just, surrounded us there until they get us out, or something would have happened if they really wanted the car. But they didn't, and they destroyed the vehicle, and so that doesn't make any sense. That there was a mistaken identity. They thought we were someone else. Definitely not.
Well, that was one of the theories I read about, that there was a high-value Mexican individual high up in the party that was supposed to be transiting that road, and there was some discussion. I think I heard, either I'm getting confused on some of the facts now. I've read so much about this case, but there was a talk about chatter.
They say that they confused us with a head of the Mexican federal police out of the San Luis Potosi area, that he drove a blue Suburban as well. That was the initial claim that the government came up with. I immediately shut that down. I said, well, it might be a blue Suburban, but it's not this one, and it's not even, doesn't look even close to what ours. And the armored vehicle is a very distinct vehicle. Plus, it's marked with diplomatic plates. I identified ourselves, and so there was other factors that they obviously led them to shoot.
Yeah, one of the things that makes me think that it was planned, and for the life of me, I can't understand what they thought they were going to gain by destroying the vehicle and killing you two guys. I understand what they think, in the very least, that they could have gained from that. But the fact that those 7 or 8 guys were not killed by the head of the cartel tells me that implicitly their mission, if you want to call it that, was blessed at some level, or else they would have certainly killed them when
they kind of disowned them, if you will, but that's after they were extradited to the U.S. But there was also some chatter there. They probably were, they condemned it, and the higher ups of the Zeta cartels, and so there was talk that they went rogue on their own. But at this point, that part is still speculation.
So, one kind of a follow up here. Do you ever think about that decision to have Jaime switch over and I'm a pilot. Switch over and drive the vehicle?
No, that was that decision was part of the. Part of the reason they assigned him to me was to accompany me, to help me in this, and that just happened. That's the time I decided for him to. It could have been before, it could have been way after. That's just the time that I had driven most of the trip. I would say 5, 6, about 7 hours myself.
When was the last time you saw Jaime on that day?
Right then and there, from when he got sent, when we landed at the hospital, and we were gurneyed in, and he went to one room and I went to another.
That was the last time you saw him.
Mm-hmm.
And did you say anything to the doctors, or?
Absolutely did. The doctors at the hospital didn't know that we were Americans. They assumed that we were Mexican federal police that were attacked by the cartel. I didn't identify myself. I didn't tell them anything. I was petrified to be at the hospital. I was so afraid that they were just going to come in and shoot me. I was on the phone with the federal police commander and my friend, begging him to send reinforcements and help. And he says, they're coming. And when I was being treated in one of the rooms, one of the doctors came and said, your partner has expired. And I just told him, please treat him with dignity and respect.
Tough time. You described feeling like a foreigner in your own land. And tell me a little bit about that.
Well, I love Mexico. Being a Mexican American, that's my heritage. I had a great advantage in speaking the language and dealing with the government of Mexico, and they were always very good to me. But at that time, I just felt like I just did not belong there, and it really just reinforced my patriotism to the United States and what, you know, I always enforced that and always kind of vocalized that I was an American. I'm very proud of it. And I felt like such a foreigner in this country that I have this attachment through my heritage. I felt so alone, and for all intents and purposes, it could have been in China. That's how foreign it felt to me.
Was your life as an agent ever the same again?
Oh,
after this
absolutely
day?
not. My special agent career ended that day. I didn't know it, and it's hard. It's hard to find out later that that was the day that it ended. Um, and it's I miss it, and I was 38 when I got shot, and it was definitely not prepared for that. I mean, this is my career that I was going to see until I possibly turned 57 years old. That's mandatory retirement for us in that career, and so I struggled with my identity. Because a lot of things happened afterwards that I wasn't welcome back.
On April the 23rd, 2020, the U.S. Office of Special Counsel, or the OSC, released investigative findings that shed new light on a 2011 tragedy involving two Immigration and Customs, ICE, and also Homeland Security Investigation HSI agents who were ambushed along a dangerous stretch of highway in Mexico by the Los Zetas drug cartel. The report acknowledged you and Agent Zapata were put in harm's way without adequate support for a dangerous mission. I think that it may have taken 9 years for them to come up with that, but I think you probably knew that.
I knew that from the very beginning, and let me tell you, I thank the Office of Special Counsel. By the way, that's all me, and I'll take the credit, and I'm not shy about it. I contacted the Office of Special Counsel about 2 years ago. We've never been able to obtain answers from the government regarding either the weapons or the assignment. Freedom of Information Act requests have been denied, or I've been received redacted sheets of paper. I'm talking about full black sheets of paper. Because President Obama at that time exerted executive privilege on these documents, and so we just haven't been able to get the document. We can't get it. So a couple of years ago, I said, you know what? A friend of mine alerted me to the Office of Special Counsel. I wasn't very familiar with them and what they do, and after I approached them, and they took on my case and my allegations, and what you just read was just this year into 2020. That they basically substantiated 3 of my allegations, and that's the summary. And it's good. It's kind of a vindication for us and the Zapata family that there's some acknowledgement there that there was some wrongdoing. They call it gross mismanagement, but nevertheless, they say they're gonna seek disciplinary action on some of these. My supervisors, I'm not holding my breath.
So what happened to your 2 supervisors?
You
don't have to name their names.
No, they're not. They've been promoted. They're head of offices, big offices in the United States now.
Let's change gears for a minute and talk about Fast and Furious.
Oh yeah, Fast and Furious.
Let's talk about the precursor first to Fast and Furious, and there was actually a precursor. And in Fast and Furious, there were roughly 2,000 weapons that were released to the bad guys, including, but not only. So I can find this. Yeah, here it is. They released 34 50 cal long guns into the public. That is a 50 cal round. If that round would have hit, let me put in this other camera. If that round had have hit your armored vehicle that day, what would have happened?
Oh, I wouldn't be here talking to you for sure.
It would have gone through both sides. That round is designed to knock down helicopters, aircraft, low-flying aircraft. lightly armored vehicles like what you were in that day and punched through solid brick walls. And yet the bad guys ended up with 34 of those. Only one of them has been recovered. And do you know who we recovered that one from?
Yeah, from El Chapo.
El Chapo Guzman.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm still trying to wrap my brain around this whole concept of Fast and Furious. One of the questions I want to ask you, do you feel like that there may have been a political agenda at the heart of Fast and Furious?
Well, I know that the previous administration are not, pro Second Amendment, and support that constitutional right that we have. I know that. I don't know how much of the political influence they had with this specific operation, other than they approved it, and it's just unfathomable to think that they would approve something as. And I'll go over it as basically as it is, and we'll go over it, and,
Right.
and people think that this is just crazy.
And to add to that, you feel like at least portions of the ATF had been politicized?
Yeah, the ATF has been politicized for a long time. I think even going back to Waco and other instances, they really have.
So, as far as awareness in our government, back in 2011, how high up the food chain do you think the operation of Fast and Furious went?
Well, it definitely went to Attorney General Eric Holder. I mean, he was held in contempt of Congress because of that, because he lied about the awareness and knowing about Fast and Furious and the timeline. And if the Attorney General knows an operation on the ground, definitely the President of the United States is aware.
It would almost be dereliction of duty if the President of the United States was not aware of what his Attorney General was doing.
That's correct.
Explain to us straw purchases and gun walking.
So the bad guys, are not able to come to the U.S. and buy a gun because, one, they're illegal, undocumented. Two, they have a criminal history. So they use straw purchasers, which are people that are clean backgrounds, that are able to pass a background to buy these weapons. And that's what the ATF did with Fast and Furious. They used the ATF themselves, straw purchasers, to buy guns to identify these individuals that were supposedly in Mexico, getting these guns. The whole premise of Fast and Furious is to let the guns walk. That's what we call them, gun walking operations. Let them go into Mexico and then identify these huge organizations, drug cartels, or arms dealers, and take them down. Which on the surface you would think, hey, that's not a bad deal, right? If there was a true coordination between both countries, because I worked in both, I can possibly see that happening with high level authorities, and say, let's plan this. Let's send a few weapons. We'll have Mexico. Everybody kind of forgets that, well, the United States is sending weapons to the United States. Listen, Mexico is a sovereign country. They have a border as well. They're letting them in. And that's what people sometimes forget. Well, how in Fast and Furious, that second part of the equation was never existed. Mexico didn't know, or they never coordinated with ATF in Mexico or the U.S. Mexican customs. Let's do a cold convoy. Let's do a what we call a controlled delivery into Mexico. These weapons are going to his warehouse, and boom, we take these guys down. Let's try it. I can see that happening, but this was not that. Fast and Furious out of Phoenix wasn't that. Not only was it was just the purchasing of these guns from these gun dealers or gun stores, but they used the gun store owners in several occasions, not just in Phoenix, but in Nevada and other states, to have them, sell the weapons. And the gun shop owners are saying, wait a minute, they're telling the ATF, this is kind of suspect that we're selling 300 AK-47s to you, and you're telling us that it's okay because you're the government and it's an investigation and so forth and so on. and so they got the short end of the stick. And they're also victims of Fast and Furious in their own right. And so the ATF wanted Fast and Furious to be the model throughout the whole United States. As a matter of fact, that's why we have our case out of Dallas and Houston. It was already spreading. They wanted these guns to go south. What they were going to do with them, I don't know. All they did is to arm the cartels in Mexico to kill thousands of Mexican citizens and 2 U.S. federal agents.
So basically, they implicated FFL dealers, gun shops, pawn brokers. They implicated these guys into their crazy scheme, and I think yesterday you even mentioned that some of these dealers ended up going to jail because they wouldn't play ball with them.
Very true. Very true.
Insane. So, in all fairness, this program had already been attempted. The Fast and Furious Light had been attempted in 2006 to 2007 under Bush in a program called Wide Receiver. And there they used 187 guns that were released. Not a single one was ever recovered. Not a single request or arrest was ever made. And it was considered an abject failure. And yet somebody in 2009 decided to clean off the books on the playbooks and reinstitute this program and try it all over again. And if 187 guns didn't work, maybe 2,000 would.
And 2,000 is kind of like the official number they throw out there, but there's a lot more weapons in that.
So we don't even have a clue. So
No.
December 10, 2010, 1 year and 2 months after Fast and Furious began, Agent Brian Terry was murdered, shot in the back near Rio Rico, Arizona, by a 5-man rip crew. 2 Fast and Furious guns were found at the scene. And then let's flash forward to February the 15th, 2011. You were shot by a Fast and Furious gun along with Jaime Zapata, who unfortunately died by Fast and Furious gun, or at least they were found at the scene. November the 13th, 2015, Paris Islamic terrorist attack. They found a Fast and Furious gun. May 3rd, 2015, Islamic extremist Nadir Sufi possessed a Fast and Furious weapon when he was killed in a shootout at an Islamic Prophet Mohammed art show that Pam Geller was conducting in Garland, Texas, and that is just the tip of the iceberg. These guns they're circulating like a volcanic cloud. They've gotten in the upper atmosphere and they're just going all around the world.
They've been recovered in many, many crime scenes around the world, of course, in Mexico. And, these guns have, some are able to be traced, some are not, as their serial number is obliterated.
So talk about that. I'm going to put up some pictures of AKs in the YouTube video and on the blog site that I'm building for this particular interview. But talk about what that means. That's like scratching the DNA.
That's scratching the DNA off of the gun to make it almost impossible to identify its origin and where it came from. Just like kind of like a VIN on a vehicle. It's in your fingerprint for a human. That's what it is for a gun. And so the ATF is very good at identifying the gun and where it came, any weapon. And some of these have been impossible, so we don't know the actual number of guns out there and the actual victims that they're attributed to them.
So in this process, there was a lot of documents that were tried that you guys, and you did file a lawsuit. We'll talk about that here shortly. But there was a lot of information that you tried to obtain from the government. But unfortunately, President Obama used his executive privilege to seal those documents, and that it essentially protected key ATF members and key Obama administration officials. Is that correct?
That's absolutely correct. To this day, the executive privilege order still remains.
Any chance that President Trump, hopefully if he gets reelected, will be able to focus on this once we get past this virus?
We're trying. I'm in contact with Brian Terry's brother, Kent Terry, and every opportunity we have, just like the one you're giving us now, is to put the word out. President Trump has already talked to the Terry family and has told them that he's aware of it and he's gonna do something about it. That's one of the things that we want, is that privilege to be lifted, so we could get access to the records, because we know the records will have the evidence that we've been seeking, and the questions to the answers. Now, one is the Fast and Furious weapons. The other is also the link to us and our shooting. Even the documents that I've requested for our own shooting, they have blocked those as well. Not with an executive privilege, but just by not giving it to us, plain and simple.
Do you think that the Mexican government was ever aware of Fast and Furious?
No, but this is a great question, because there was just a recent development. We're talking about a couple of weeks ago. The president of Mexico, through his equivalent of State Department, issued a what they call a diplomatic note, kind of a request to the U.S. government regarding Fast and Furious, and we were all kind of taken aback and wondering what's going on here. So the president of Mexico is now asking the U.S. government to answer that question, if in fact Mexico was aware, and the administration at that time, which was the President Felipe Calderon administration, and if they in fact were aware of the weapons going in there into their country. So I'm not holding my breath on that one, but I never thought that Mexico would be at this point kind of helping us, and I'm very curious to see what the responses of our State Department and our Department of Justice.
Well, I did read of a higher up in the ATF that had a sworn statement that he said conclusively that the Mexican government was aware of the program. And I just find this whole thing so bizarre. We had one of our pilots that accidentally had a 40 caliber bullet. A bullet can't hurt anybody. He had a 40 caliber bullet in his bag, and when he went through customs in Mexico,
oh gosh,
they caught him and they tried to put him in jail for over a year for one stupid bullet. And yet we're hauling over 2,000 guns over the border. Oh, no big deal. Come on in, back it up.
Oh yeah. It's illegal to have a firearm in Mexico as a citizen.
For law-abiding citizens.
No, for law-abiding citizens.
Only the
Yeah,
bad
well, yeah. All the bad guys have them except the law-abiding ones.
That makes sense to me. Hopefully that law will not be adopted in this country. So what is your opinion of Manuel Lopez Obrador?
Well, he's a interesting man. Initially I thought, well, maybe this is the change that Mexico needs. He's a socialist, and at this point, whatever would help Mexico, just and whatever's gone. But it really has. He's been there a year and a half, and I haven't seen absolutely no effort in his administration to tackle the violence and these foreign terrorist organizations. He said he'd rather give them hugs than bullets, and it is just incredible. Myself and other retired agents from DEA and that follow this closely, the cartels are out of control. If you thought they were bad, 10, 15 years ago, they're really, really bad now. And they have infiltrated, like I said, 80% of their country, and they're all over the U.S. and up to 40 countries. They're not just in Mexico. If people believe that they're just in Mexico, I have some land somewhere to sell. But it is, he has just drawn a blind eye to that biggest problem of the insecurity in Mexico. We don't understand why. He has, however, helped in the illegal immigration aspect of his administration with President Trump, and that was surprising. He got their National Guard to go down to their own southern border to help. Remember these influx of these caravans coming in, and he has helped in the immigration side of it, and it's been actually pretty effective. And now it kind of has worn down because of COVID-19, but when it comes to the biggest issue in Mexico, and that's the insecurity and the violence, Mexico had 36,000 murders in 2019. They've had 65,000 people missing. Imagine if we had 36,000 murders in the United States. Remember, there's 120 million people in Mexico, not 325 or whatever we have in the United States. It is an extraordinary amount of homicides, and missing up to 65,000 people that have just been vanished.
Miami, this was in Miami. This interview was conducted in 2012, and it was Jorge Ramos of Univision. And in the interview, he's asking President Obama about Fast and Furious, and this is what President Obama said. I think it's important for us to understand that Fast and Furious program was a field-initiated, whatever that means, program begun under the previous administration. And then when he was further questioned, he said that when Eric Holder, the Attorney General, found out about it, he discontinued it. We assigned an Inspector General to do a thorough report that was just issued, confirming that, in fact, Eric Holder did not know about this, that he took prompt action, and that the people who did initiate this were held accountable. Here's the irony. And had Jorge Ramos actually done his homework, he would have found this comment that came out the day before. The U.S. Department of Justice's Inspector General released a 512-page report about Fast and Furious. Our review of Operation Fast and Furious and related matters revealed a series of misguided strategies, tactics, errors in judgment, and management failures, the report noted. Continuing, the report also clearly shows that Fast and Furious began under, drumroll please, President Barack Obama, dating its inception to October the 9th. Obama took office in January of 2009. This directly contradicts Barack Obama's claim during the Jorge Ramos interview. Do you have any comments on that?
Well, they knew, and Congress got close, and they had a difficult time obtaining all these records. Congress did, we've never gotten them, so they got some, but they all they could do is hold our own Attorney General in contempt of Congress, and that's Eric Holder, because he lied to them under oath. And that's that. That's no one has been held accountable. The Brian Terry family is still waiting, just as is the Zapata family and myself, to really hold those responsible accountable. That's basically the bottom line.
I find it just beyond amazing that what used to call itself a press and media in America were so incredibly uncurious about this whole Fast and Furious program. I don't remember seeing that much from the Alphabet News, ABC, CBS, NBC. I don't remember them really prying into the president about this. And the funny thing is, Eric Holder was fired shortly after all this happened. Mm-hmm. And then he was held, previously he was held in contempt of court. So did they put him in jail? Did they do anything to him at all? No, just held him in contempt of court. So like it's no big deal, just held in contempt of court. So again, where I'm going with this is Fast and Furious, a lot of people believe was a political operation. And they used the skeleton, what remained of wide receivers, to craft an anti-gun narrative that was not so much about catching bad guys as it was aimed at trying to show how easily guns could pass from a dealer and end up in the hands of bad guys. And a lot of people, they said that they feel like that was really the aim of Fast and Furious, not so much the fact that they were going to pass these guns into the hands of bad guys, but what they really wanted to do was to exemplify that narrative that was going on at the time, that Second Amendment's bad, that guns are bad, And oh, by the way, it's just Swiss cheese going back and forth the border to Mexico. You, any thoughts
Maybe,
on that?
yeah, possibly. That's possibly definitely have explored that, and I go back to they talk about it like if it's an open border. Also, remember we have our issues with on border people coming in here. You try to do that going into Mexico, and it's a whole other different story. They have their own laws, their own sovereignty, and so how are the guns getting in there?
Yeah, I actually read one article where they said that America had become a de facto illicit gun dealer / smuggler in the process. How fast and furious. So talk to me about morale while you were in, and then as you talk to your friends at ICE, and now when you talk to your friends that are still in, that period compared to this period. What's the morale like over there?
My morale was good. It was we started noticing close to the end of President Obama's term and the beginning of the second, we started feeling on the at the field level, like he says. By the way, any decision that made at the field level as an agent on the field level, I can't draft up Fast and Furious and then not have it go up the chain of command. And I just had to say that. But tell me again.
Yeah, so I guess what I'm trying to get at is, let's say that you had you have enough friends that are working there, so you know what the morale was like overall, generally speaking, for all of ICE in that 2011, 2012 time frame. And then you snap forward to today, and those same officers, is there any difference? I mean, do they feel any more supported, less supported by the government?
There's a vast difference. I'm sorry, I had lost my track of thought there, but we had started seeing the impact that the Obama administration was having on their decision making, especially on immigration. There was no more investigations to employers. And all that.
Explain that, please.
So one of the duties of ICE is to go after employers that hire illegal aliens, and those groups were basically shut down. There was no one hitting those type of employers. We were kind of reshifting those agents around. Also, there were. The Obama administration at one point put a age limit as who you can encounter ICE agents from. I think the age of 16 to 30 was the age group. Like if they felt within that, this is pre-DACA. If they felt within that group, they basically were untouchable, and that affected us on the field. So yes, immigration laws have been in the books for a very, very long time, and so. Kind of what we see happening right now with our police forces is that they're not letting them enforce the law. We don't need any more newer laws. We have plenty of laws. We just need to allow our law enforcement officials to exercise them and enforce them. And so that's where the morale comes in, because now that's happening. And under the Trump administration, let me tell you, absolutely, they feel the backing. And the backup in law enforcement the term is used a lot. But let me tell you, the one backup is when you're an undercover agent and you have your backup right there behind you. That's one thing. But when you have the backup of your supervisor, your assistant special agent in charge, and the person all the way up in Washington, it does something to you. It makes you feel good. And so, yeah, it definitely makes a difference. Absolutely.
Are you familiar with acting ICE Director John Torres?
Yeah, I know John. Yes.
He described you as your work ethic and you as an individual is nothing short of incredible. Talk about after 2011, how were you treated? We've kind of talked about this already, but just a wee bit more detail. You say your career was pretty much over at that point.
It really was. My agency, the way I describe it is they just did not know what to do with me. This had never happened before. And ICE did not have the mechanisms in place, and I'll come back to that term because I don't like it, to deal with a situation like this. They just didn't. And so I ended up, myself and my family, getting the short end of the stick and being the guinea pig. And also because of the people at the higher end of my management. We're talking about what we call SESs. They're above the GS schedule. They're not GS 15s or above that. We're under the Obama administration, and so there was no backing of me and my family there. I never requested for anything extraordinary, nothing special of me. I didn't say, you know what, because I got shot in the line of duty, you need to give me this and do that. Absolutely not. I just wanted something fair, and that just didn't happen. And it has to do with monetary expenses a lot. My family and I went through hardship because of the shooting. My agency at one point, there was no offering of, we're going to put you in this position. They ignored a lot of the diagnoses that I had, physically, emotionally, and all that. It just like it didn't exist. My family and I were basically left out on our own. Initially in Washington D.C., after the shooting, there was a threat to me and my family, and so you can't be nowhere near the southern border. So they shipped us out to D.C., and that's where I did my physical rehabilitation. And it was a nightmare being there. There was no one assigned to us, and there's friends, individuals that would come visit us, but I'm talking about the agency backing you up. We had to look for a place to live. I had to fight to have my kids enrolled in a school in Virginia. Real life things that I always tell you, probably heard me say this, and I'll say it many, many other times. You leave your house today, just leave your house and never come back. What would you need? Well, that's what happened to me. I never went back. Neither did my wife was given an hour to pack a bag in our apartment. My kids didn't know, were pulled out of school. They had no idea what was going on. They didn't know if I was alive, I was dead. They had no idea. They give them an hour to pack a bag, and they put them in a hotel in Mexico City to secure them. The following day, they get flown out by a CBP airplane so I could reunite after. By the way, I never said I went from Mexico to Houston, get treated there, then eventually met up with my family in El Paso. And they went through their own traumatic event, the way they were extracted from Mexico. But none of that, our agency just was not prepared, did not know what to do. And that my kids needed to go back to school. They needed toothbrushes. They needed backpacks. I needed, it was snowing in D.C. It was 72 in Mexico. We needed clothing. Just think of what you need right now if you never left home. If you left home and never went back. And that's what we were felt with. I showed up in scrubs. The doctor in Houston, everybody was asking me, what can I do for you? What do you need, Victor? And I asked the surgeon over there, can I get some clothes? Or, my clothes was bloodied up and torn. And he got me a fresh, brand new pair of scrubs. That's how I showed up to El Paso. And then my dad ended up giving me some sweats until my wife showed up with some clothing. And it was all like shorts and, short sleeve shirts. But these are real life issues and that we lived through. And for many years, not just when we went to D.C., there was a time, I needed to get my family. It was my kids were not healthy in D.C. We got out. We got assigned to the U.S. Embassy in Madrid. I myself just wanted to get back to work. I wanted to be what I was before. And that's why I say this. There was an attempt, and it just didn't work out that way. When I was in Madrid, I became very unhealthy, very emotionally distraught, PTSD, you name it. It hit me over there.
Yeah, you talked to me about this yesterday. You said it literally hit you like a hammer one night?
It really did. I've been a very healthy person all my life, thank God, and I never even called in sick. I used to. My mom is so. I have the certificates. I never used to miss school. I had 100% attendance records, and that helped me because I had this time stored as far as sick leave and vacation time. Well, all I want to do was go back to work, and we take the family to Madrid and let's focus and kind of be away. We wanted to be away. That was a good thing for us. 8 months later, one day I just couldn't get out of bed. right there. It's funny how depression, anxiety, and all these, post-traumatic stress injury occurs, and it manifests itself physically as well. And so it's very hard to understand it when it's happening to you, when you don't understand it, and you don't know. So I went through that, and eventually we were kicked out of Spain, and they tell me go pick a city to go live in the United States. Well, where do I go live? I'm not going to go anywhere to the southern border. So we ended up in Denver. I wanted to go in Texas. I wanted to go to San Antonio. They denied that. I asked for Austin. They denied that. I said, I'll go to Flagstaff, Arizona. I'm trying to pick nice cities here. I'm trying to pick a nice office. I know better. I'm not being shy about that. And ended up being Tampa or Colorado and Denver. And we ended up in Denver. It was a good assignment. I thought that was going to be it. And it just didn't work out. I had been stripped of my gun, my badge. They wanted to take my badge. My call sign, my law enforcement call sign had been erased. My email was deactivated. They sent a memo to my house in Denver asking me to give up my credentials. I'm talking about my badge that I earned. And I said, listen, you could come and take your guns and whatever you want, but I'm not going to give you my credentials. And fought that, and eventually they backed off on that. And so I went through a lot of issues, and the treatment started coming in, and it worked. I had used all of my sick leave and annual leave for a work-related injury. I had tried to be on workers' comp, but that didn't work out. Eventually, it did once we came back to the States, and I said I have to do something about this, and the only way was to seek a retirement. I wanted an early retirement. They denied that. Eventually, was granted a medical retirement.
You had mentioned you were trying to reach out and get some help while you were in Madrid, and you even went over and talked to the military guys. How did that work out for you?
Oh, that was such a terrible day. I had heard the military has excellent resources when it comes to those type of injuries, and so I went to the embassy and spoke to the military attaché in confidence. I told him, listen, this is what I'm going through. You guys have any programs here in Spain? And he tells me, absolutely, we do. We have a great program down south. I think it'll be great for you. And I was very excited, and I was willing to do what I had to do to treat myself. My agency didn't. This is me doing it. My agency didn't care whether I got treatment or not. I paid out of pocket for my own counselor in Madrid. So I'm really trying. My wife is there with me, trying to help me get better. There were very, very dark times. And so I tell the attaché the military attaché, by the time I went down to my office, he had already told my boss, and violated my confidence right then and there. And it felt terrible. And all of a sudden, my agency starts acting up. What's wrong with Victor? All of a sudden, there's something wrong with me because I have post-traumatic stress. There's something wrong with me. There's got to be something wrong with Victor. They didn't understand what it was. And by the way, this whole time I've been able to carry a firearm. My doctors have never said you're not a danger to yourself or to others, Victor. There's a very different facets of post-traumatic stress. I want to make that clear. And believe me, I've become like a quasi expert on it because I've read many books on it, and just to become more familiar with it as I am affected by it. But they kind of used that as an excuse and really used it against me. And so it was a terrible, terrible time in Madrid as far as that, my employer was concerned. And then we're in Denver, and then, I had to go through the retirement route.
Do you feel like you became something of a burr under the saddle of being the bonnet, a pain in the butt to people high up, well-placed at ATF? Because maybe if your case that we're just about to talk about was successful and they were able to get the documents, you may well have been the downfall of a lot of careers.
Maybe, but you bring up a good point, because there were my directors in my agency that I have found out through other friends of mine that have said, what does Victor want? I was a nuisance to them. What does he want? We've given him everything that he ever's asked for. That's their response. And that can't be furthest from the truth.
update us on the federal tort claim that you and the Jaime Zapata estate have filed, and also do you stay in touch with the family, and how are they doing? So three-part question. Talk to us about your claim. What's the disposition of that? And do you stay in touch with the Zapata family, and how are they doing if you do?
So the lawsuit we filed back in 2012, just trying to get some answers, is very difficult to file to a claim against the government because of immunity issues. We went in through many avenues to try to pierce through them. We were unsuccessful. We filed a lawsuit. We had a judge in Texas, a U.S. district judge, hear the case. Never fully hear the case as far as discovery. That's all we wanted. Get to the discovery point, because as you know, once we get discovery, we get documents. It never happened. It stayed there for years and years until the court dismissed all those avenues of the lawsuit. The last one that was open was the Freedom of Information Act, and the judge says, well, everything that you're claiming, bring me those documents. Well, we're in a catch-22. The government won't give us the documents, so we can't provide them to the court. Dismissed. So in May of 2000, I don't remember, 16th or 17th, the whole thing is dismissed. There's no claim anymore. We didn't recover anything. There's no money recovered. It's gone, and that's the end of that.
Was this case shifted to the Ohio courts? Did I see that, or did it remain?
It was all in Brownsville, in the Southern
Okay.
District of Texas.
So, if Obama's records are unsealed, and Trump manages to get them unsealed, will you be able to reinvigorate your case?
Probably not. I've inquired about that. If we had the documents, it would have to be something extraordinary through a congressional hearing, which I'm trying. I've been trying for many years to do it. I'm actually in contact with the Senate Homeland Security Committee and the House Homeland Security Committees in Congress to get them to hold a congressional hearing.
January the 21st, 2020, the murder convictions were vacated for cartel members in the Special Agent Jaime Zapata's murder. Section 18 U.S.C. 1114 does not apply to violations committed outside the United States. Do you feel that this interpretation makes it open season on American agents serving abroad?
Absolutely. This was a blow. This was just this year. This was a blow to the Zapata family, and I could not believe it. So the defendants, the shooters, the murderers, the evildoers that I just described, appealed their sentences. Now, it's quickly to describe, there were 7 defendants total. 1 was presumed dead. They were all extradited from Mexico to the United States. 5 of them pled guilty. 2 of them went to trial, all on the same charges. Charges were murder, attempted murder of an internationally protected person, and firearms violations. 1 had aiding and abetting on them. The 5 pled guilty to that and got very minimal sentences, 36 years down to 12. The 2 that went to trial, which is the ones, if you Google it, you'll only see that. You won't see the other 5. There's a lot of public affairs media releases on the 2 that went to trial and got life. And everybody was celebrating because of that. We weren't, because of the other 5. We didn't agree with those sentences. So fast forward, they appealed their sentences, and the D.C. Circuit Appellate Court said what you just said. They dismissed and vacated the murder charge of Special Agent Jaime Zapata because the murder happened extraterritorially, meaning it happened outside of the United States. Now, there are other 2 or 3 circuits in the United States that have already ruled that didn't matter, but this court didn't take that precedent under consideration. Another thing, so then we got that news. So the Department of Justice says, we're going to file a motion to have all of the justices of the D.C. Appellate Court hear the case, not just a panel of 3. I think there's 11. So they call it an en banc motion, having all the justices hear it. Denied. It was denied shortly after that. And so I started making phone calls to lawmakers, Senator John Cornyn, Congressman Michael McCall, Peter King out of New York, and FLIOA, the Federal Law Enforcement Officers Association, has been really good in helping me as they have presence on the Hill to amend the law. So this is something separate. One is we're dealing with the appeal over here, and hopefully it goes to the U.S. Supreme Court on that decision. We're hoping that the Department of Justice will do that. I'm in pursuit of that. Meanwhile, let's not have this happen again. Let's just go ahead and change the law. And they've drafted the law. I'm not sure if it's going to be voted on shortly. I don't know the status right now, but they have drafted the law to basically it's a one-pager that says any murder of a U.S. person that happens outside the United States, it's going to be valid. In other words, and they're going to put the word extraterritorial in there, and so to avoid any confusion or interpretation of it.
How much would it help you guys as law enforcement if these cartels, particularly the top 5 in Mexico, if they were labeled as terrorist organizations? How much would that?
What
Explain that to the layperson, what that actually means.
It means that with the cartels will then be treated just like we treat ISIS, the Taliban, and Al Qaeda, just like that. So if you, as a United States citizen, start contacting ISIS, what do you think would happen, right? FBI is going to come knocking on your door. Well, if you start contacting the Sinaloa cartel, or the Jalisco New Generation, or the Gulf Cartel, the Zeta Cartel, which is now the Cartel New Generation, the same thing would apply, and the penalties would increase mostly to life in prison. But most importantly, it would freeze all the assets and all the money, because we know that the cartels, that's the biggest difference between the, ISIS and Al Qaeda. They might not have the ideology behind it, but to me it doesn't matter. Their ideology, the cartels, is money and power. And so we cut off the funding, the money that is infiltrated in the world banking system. And so it'll be very effective. It's a cumbersome task, but it goes all the way down to the gangbanger drug dealer in Chicago and St. Louis. They now associate, these drugs still come from Mexico. If you're associated with that cartel because you're selling their product on the streets of St. Louis, you are now a terrorist organization, and you will be treated as such.
Follow the money.
Absolutely.
That's always the big thing. Well, we're kind of finally closing in towards the end. This has been a long, in-depth interview. I want to kind of bring it full circle, come back to you and your family. And Jaime Zapata, most importantly, how can Jaime be best remembered?
By the patriot and that he was, and the representative that he was of our country, and what he stood for. He's a good guy. He's a good, wholesome guy. Texan, and I want him remembered that way. And the sacrifice that he gave is one that should be remembered forever by many, many people as possible. You asked if I am in contact with the family. I am. I have regular contact with them. I try to keep them informed of all that I do with the Office of Special Counsel. Everything I do it for their family as much as I do it for mine. I feel it as part of my duty as a survivor to continue to do that. And so I am in contact with them. They have suffered tremendously in the loss of their son, and they've, and so it's something that I try to bring, at least hopefully get them some answers to some of these questions.
Who's Victor Avila today?
Well, I consider myself I'm a husband, I'm a father, I'm a son, I'm a community member. I'm a leader. I'm many, many things. Some people might say otherwise, maybe not describe me in different words, but it brings me this part of my life. This is just something that happened to me, and this is something that identifies with me, and it's something that I'm not necessarily want to get rid of. It's just something that this is what happened, and this is what it is, and But because of that, I've been able to gain a lot of experiences, and I've lived in a lot of places around the world and cities in the United States, and it gives me a really in-depth and leadership skills, crisis management, you name it, to try to give back. I've been a public servant since I was the age of 23. That's what I know what to do. This is what I like to do, and so that's why public service just basically is calling me, and that's how I've come to want to be a member of the South Lake City Council.
What brings you pleasure in life these days?
Being with my family, seeing them grow up. My daughter's going to be a senior in college. My son is doing great in school, big soccer player. My wife, seeing them happy. Simple as that. Being with my parents, my sisters, and my in-laws. Just being with my family, it makes me happy. And maybe grilling some of the time.
Good. I hope to get invited over for some of that. When I spoke to you yesterday, you had come back from the doctor. Tell me about how you're doing physically and mentally still. How many years down the road? What are we, 9 years?
Yeah, I had a procedure just a couple of days ago on my back, and this was a radio frequency ablation. I have issues in my hip and my back, and I suffer from back spasms and a little bit on my leg. But I have these procedures to allow me to move. You see me and people, hey, Victor's fine, and I am. I walk fine. But I do have that chronic pain that I deal with. Emotionally, I'm very stable. If anybody has any questions about that, I'm okay. We are in a much better place, my family and I. Those were dark times in the early years after the shooting. But it only made me a stronger person, and only brought my faith even closer to God. It really, my kids are so resilient. My wife, it's incredible, the support that I've gotten from them, and any endeavor that I seek now is I have their full support.
One quick question going back to Feb 15, 2011. You had made a comment that God had decided he was going to take you today. Tell me about that.
There's never been a doubt in my mind that what I went through is and survived that is nothing short of a miracle. God decided that day that he wanted Jaime with him and not me yet. And so I initially struggled a lot with the, survivor's guilt and what does that mean? You're a survivor. What does that mean? Why am I alive? And so I came down to basically making it as simple as maybe it's just for me to be with my family. Maybe it was just as simple to see my kids grow up. Maybe it's a bigger cause. Maybe it's to serve my community. Maybe it's to give back everything that I've been through all my life, not just the shooting in Mexico, but what I know about leadership, how I bring people together, and make a difference in someone's lives.
A lot of the interviews I've seen on you, they describe you as a hero. When you hear that, what do you think? I mean, do you think of yourself as a hero? I mean, how do you feel? Do you reel from it, or are you impressed by it? Tell me how you feel when somebody says Victor Avila is a hero.
Yeah, I'm not I don't typically embrace it. I definitely don't think I'm a hero. I'll tell you, I have a room full. When I got to Denver, I had a room full of awards, and when we moved here, there's very few awards up now, and those awards are the ones that I received for doing my job. And there's a couple that I got that mean a lot to me after the shooting, a Medal of Valor here and there, and recognition for that. But the service that I provided and the recognition that I received prior to the shooting are very big for me, because I was still an agent. I still did work for the government, and I started being referred to, oh, this is the guy that got shot, or the guy that survived. Well, you know what? It does something to you after a while. And I'm like, I'm not. I was a working agent, and I was a proud working agent. But I tell you what, I'm not a hero, but I am a patriot, and I'm an American. I'm proud of it.
Well, that segues nicely into my next question, and we're just about finished. I did reach out to a lot of people in preparation for this interview, and, well, what would you guys like me to ask Victor? And one of the questions that became a common theme, and this one originally came from a journalist friend of mine who does really nice work in the journalist world. They said, after all you have been through, with the shooting, with the ATF, with ICE, why in the hell, quote, how is it that you could have remained and you're still such a staunch patriot and supporter of law enforcement and this country, in fact?
It's a great question. I support ICE 100%. I support the men and women of ICE, of CBP, of all law enforcement, especially state and local, and our first responders. I know what they go through on a daily basis. I know the sacrifices that they make with their family. What happened to me is these individuals in this agency that, unfortunately, it happens in the government, and I'm not the only one that have ever been done wrong by the government, for sure. But I'll tell you what, I'm not going to be a bitter person about that. It's something that happened to me. I've been fortunate with the love from my family and God to oversee and to get me through this. And so that doesn't change the fact that, as a matter of fact, it makes me even more patriotic. It makes me even more supportive of law enforcement, especially as you and I talk here today. What's going on in our world is just incredible to me, what we're witnessing. And so now is the time to even be more supportive of them.
You told me in a recent conversation that not a single day goes by that you don't think of Jaime.
No, not one. It could be, I think I told you, it could be a couple of seconds that day, or it could be 10 minutes, 15 minutes. It could be while I'm showering. It could be when I go to sleep. It doesn't matter when or where, but I'll always think of him. And I'll always think of them to remind me that I do have a little bit of that mission and that duty to whatever answers I can get. I will not stop. And I want to make this clear. That doesn't interfere with my life and what I want to do. This is something that is part of my being and what I've gone through. What I want to accomplish in politics and other things is separate from that. You can't. I do walk and chew gum at the same time.
So we're going to lighten it up a little bit here as we close in towards the finish line. You are writing a book. Tell us about that, Victor.
Oh, I've been working on this project for several years, and it's been difficult. I didn't know how hard it was to write a book. I say the joke. I went to college. I could sit down and write. Boy, it's so wrong. But I'm very, very happy now that I'm at the stage where there's actually yesterday I received a full draft of the book, and it's the very first one. After some edits, now I'm going to go through it and another edit. It's at the editing process, to say the least. So, but it's almost done, and hoping to have it published by the end of this summer.
So give me a signed copy, and I'll do a book review on it.
Absolutely.
Any final thoughts or comments that you'd like to make today? Anything that I missed that you would like to touch on?
No, this is been a very thorough interview. I appreciate it. You really let me express, as you can tell, many phases and facets of what had happened, and to me and my family in the last 10 years. And I know we're going to talk more about a lot of other subjects to talk about. And I also want people to know me about that. This is important, but I also like to focus on what I can offer, and that's a lot.